Today we're diving into the critical topic of incident response plans. Picture this: your systems are under attack, sensitive data is at risk, and every second counts. How prepared are you to respond effectively? Join us as we break down the essentials of an incident response plan, share our success stories, and offer insights to fortify your defenses. This is Off the Wire.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Off the Wire. We've got another episode for you. This is the podcast where we help you curb your cybersecurity risk and tackle your technology challenges. And today we're going to be talking about incident response plans and why they're critical. And before I get into that, Tanner's the CTO at Blue Ridge Energy, and myself, I'm the VP of IT over at 4 County EMC. And together we have a total of 35 years experience. Yes, we're getting up there. And much of that, cybersecurity is a focus for us. And I feel like just, every year that goes by, cybersecurity is more of a focus than it was the previous years. So we're definitely getting heavy into cybersecurity.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Cybersecurity, I think just because of the threat level that we're starting to see increase now, just becoming, obviously it's not everything that we do, but it's just becoming a bigger part of the pie. So, Anthony, you were just telling me you had just got back, I think, from a conference, security conference, actually.
Yeah, it was the NRECA CyberTech conference. And I'll say this, it was a great conference, but almost every conference that I go to these days, it seems like they're all turning into cyber conferences. They're still, they still focus on technology, but usually at least half the content is cybersecurity at this point, which, that's great. We all need help with cybersecurity. And it's great. But I'll say this, going to a dedicated cybersecurity conference is great. I got to see a lot of great ideas. I got to go over some topics that were, new to me. One thing I'll point out was one that they talk about the mental health of the folks, dealing with cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is very stressful. And if you have an incident, I can't, I've had small incidents, but I haven't had anything major. But I can't imagine the stress that brings onto an organization. Anyways, just a lot of great tips that I made a lot of good contacts, and I've got quite a few things to apply back at our organization when we start work back next week.
That's good to hear. Yeah. For those that are watching, you're going to notice that I'm not at my normal podcast location there, but I'm doing some, getting some vacation time in with the family. So kind of working on that mental health, just to tie into what you were just saying. I'm, looking forward to this podcast. We were talking about this incident response plans. Obviously, it's something really at this point I think it is kind of table stakes. Everyone really needs one. But I think you were mentioning to me like you've done some research and not as many people have one as we were thinking.
Yeah, this was a surprise thing. It was actually one of the individuals at the CyberTech conference. He said that only 47% of people have an IRP, and I got to digging into that, and I looked up, one of the first references I hit was a site called FR Secure, and they had even a lower amount. They had 45%. So, a little bit less than half of people have an IRP. So that was really a surprising thing to see.
Yeah, that is really surprising. Well, I'm hoping this episode is going to help our listeners at least. Either depending on kind of where they're at, either if they already have an IRP, maybe they'll give them a few things to refine. If they're just getting started, obviously helping them out, and then if they're not started at all, maybe giving them the encouragement to go ahead and get started.
Yeah.
So we've talked. IRPs. In your opinion, what is an IRP? Just to kind of make it at the kind of explain it at the basic level.
Yeah. So I'm a former jarhead. So we always use the KISS method: keep it simple, stupid. And really, just an incident response plan. It's really just the actions that you're going to take in an event, and just kind of breaking it down, into more simple steps. One thing we previously discussed, Tanner, that you brought up is, what was it? You want to make it to where an incident response plan can be understood by an accountant?
Not trying to throw shade at accountants, but they may have a tough time. But no, I heard someone say, and I think really this is the quote, that your incident response plan really needs to be understood by your least tenured technical employee. So
okay.
Imagine you just hired a help desk person. They've had 2 years of experience. Not that they're going to know every single technical detail, but they ought to be able to read it and understand it, and not be so complicated that they couldn't kind of make heads or tails of it.
Okay. Well, back to what an incident response plan is. Anyways, so like I said, it's the actions you're going to take during an event. But an incident response plan, it's also going to have just some playbooks, basically how you're going to respond depending on the threat level. So you're going to have like, your smaller incidents, say a malicious actor, they send an email with some malware, but it gets blocked by your EDR or maybe your email security. You're not going to, you'll have different reporting requirements for that. And, you're not going to call your cyber insurance company for that. You're going to handle that in house. But if you got the thing where, customer data or employee data stolen and it's out on the dark web, there's going to be a different level of response. There's really going to be a full gamut of issues that can happen, and you want to respond accordingly. And then also another thing for an incident response plan, and this is a big part of it, is really just all of your contacts. Who is going to be communicating with your employees, who's going to be communicating with your, the people that you deal with, your customers. And then also, if you got legal counsel, you're going to have that in there. If you have cyber insurance, obviously that's going to be one of the first people you call. You want to have the contact information for that. Do you have a security vendor on retainer to help handle that? You're going to have all that information in there. And just really, you want to have all that information so you're not researching it during an event. And then also with these incident response plans, one thing is just really, having a lot of folks involved in your organization, and of course, like the IT department and the cybersecurity folks, they're going to want to, have read and reviewed and approved your incident response plan. And also you're going to have senior leadership, the CEO, the senior staff, and maybe even your board of directors, if you have those, they're going to want to approve on this incident response plan.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I think those are kind of the basics. I was kind of thinking as we were kind of prepared for this, like, why do we need an incident response plan? I know a lot of people might just say, well, it's something you got to have. But I always like to, I think, explain the why. And there might be a lot of reasons you might have one. Could be regulatory requirements. I know depending on what type of regulations your company may fall under, whether it's HIPAA or GDPR or any of the other ones, PCI, those may actually have a requirement for you to meet that compliance for a plan. Could be a legal requirement. There's some states that have breach laws. Actually, I would pretty much say all states have breach laws, and not all of them maybe require you to have an incident response plan, but some states breach laws have the requirement to have an incident response plan. If you're following frameworks, we talked a lot about this a couple episodes ago about CIS framework, but there's other frameworks such as NIST or other ones like ISO frameworks, things like that. Part of those frameworks typically include this. So if you're trying to apply a framework to your business or to your cybersecurity kind of posture, then that might be part of it. And I'm a kind of a sports guy, so I like to make this kind of analogies. And you kind of mentioned that playbook, and I really think of it as a playbook. You don't want to. The reason why we need to have it is you don't want to create it on the fly. You don't. You're going to be incident responding if you have a cyber attack. Whether you have a plan or not, that's up to you. I would rather have a plan ahead of time instead of making up a plan on the fly. And I would think of that in like that playbook sense where, you don't make up a playbook when the game starts. You have a playbook, you practice the plays, and then you're executing the plays during the game. If you try to like make up the plays during the game, it's never going to work. And it really helps us like perfect our defense, helps us manage our risk. And like we said, most importantly, and I don't like to lead off with this, but it's really just security best practice. At this point, it's something that everyone needs to have. You mentioned 45% or 45% of people do have one. So that's quite a few people that don't have one. And we're here to convince you of that it's really not something that's out of reach. It is something that you could do. And really it's full of pretty, basic pieces and parts. It just takes some work. It's not anything super technical. It just takes some time. It takes some people, some proofreading, and things like that.
Just another thing with the incident response plan, I hear more and more about people that have either quit or retired when they have an incident, and that's horrible for both parties. It's horrible for the person that is so overwhelmed, so stressed that they decide to leave or retire. But it would also be extremely horrible to the folks that have to sit there and deal with the consequences afterwards. And I honestly know of an organization that happened to. It was within 2 days that the IT lead left. So one thing I would mention, having an instant response plan, it's there for everyone. the expert
Mm-hmm.
that you have on staff, they may not be there. And that's why you want to have, another reason why you want to have an incident response plan. So, the rest of the organization, they, at least the person with the expertise, put this together. And just another thing about, we're talking about people not having it, it doesn't have to be perfect. Don't let going from A to Z stop you. If you can get to go from A to D, get somewhere, have a document. And as you review it and reference it in the future, which we'll talk about, you'll be able to improve upon that. So, don't let, perfection kind of stop you.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Just, in our own experience, we probably are 10 iterations deep of our incident response plan. So I'm not going to lie to anyone here. The first incident response plan wasn't that great. We were trying to get something on paper. And like you said, like it doesn't have to be great necessarily. It has to be something. And then you can use that as your baseline, and then you can kind of iterate and improve that. And you go to a conference, someone says, "Hey, this is something that we feel like needs to be in an incident response plan." Hey, that's something you can add in at a later time.
Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about, you talked a little bit about this earlier when you're kind of going through the basics, but maybe in some more detail, let's go through kind of the nuts and bolts of an incident response plan. This is a typical incident response plan. This isn't something necessarily like every single one has exactly, because every company is a little bit different, but maybe talk a little bit about that.
At its basics, you're going to have just an overview and introduction, just saying, when the document, what the document is and when it'll be used. And then, you're going to have your team layout and your contacts, who's in charge of the response team, who's in charge of communications. You're just going to want to have all that laid out. And then you're going to talk about, incident detection. You're going to talk about classification. You're going to have, like I said, you're going to have different levels of an incident. And then you want to talk about reporting. And I'll say this, this is one of those things, another reason why you want to have it. If you have, different regulations and different rules that you have to abide by as far as reporting, you don't have to just remember those on the fly. You want to have those documented in your IRP. That way you're meeting the requirements, you're meeting the regulations that you need to abide by. Like I discussed just a little bit ago, you're going to have different levels of incidents, and you're going to want some kind of, I would break it down. You can have it broken down into level 1, level 2, level 3, or however you want to do it. You can call it high level, low level, medium level. Just break it down into the you want to break it down into the types of incidents you can have, and basically go into the appropriate response for each type of incident. And then also just the going into like eradication or response, you want to break that down. I mean, I guess this is a military thing. You want to break it down Barney style. You want to have it in simple terms and talk about, like for our incident response plan, we have it in 4 different stages. You've got the detection and reporting, you've got the engagement initial analysis, and then you got responding to the incident. And then a very important part to not make sure you miss is the post-incident review. After you have an incident, you're going to want to review that. You're not going to want to wait 2 months afterwards and try to remember what happened. So immediately after, an incident is over, I know everyone, well, depending on the severity of it, you can be wore out, but you definitely want to do that post-incident review while it's fresh in your mind. So anyways, whatever levels you want to break it down to, and just basically the type of response, depending on your needs of your organization, how you would respond to it. Another part, this is a very important part that I think everyone should have in their incident response plan, is evidence handling. If you don't write down the chain of custody, if you don't have the evidence secured appropriately, that it will not be admissible in court. So that's something where, you at least want to have some references, if not a little cheat sheet, but you definitely want to have something there for, handling evidence. Cause, like I dealt with classified information. It's a little related to evidence handling, a little. So I'm vaguely familiar with it, but, a lot of people, they've never handled evidence or don't have, a police background or something like that. So that's something you're definitely going to want to have something to be able to reference. And like I said, depending on the level of the event, you'll have your responses kind of broke down on how you're going to respond. And then also just who do you need to include? At what point do you call your cyber insurance? At what point do you bring in legal counsel? If you have a retainer, at what point you want to do that? And, you can have that broken down like a level 1, say it's a low level incident. You'll handle that in house. Level 2, it might escalate where you have your, if you have a security provider, maybe they get involved. And like the top level, obviously you're going to want the cyber insurance, but you just want to have that all broken down just to help you, go through when you're in the situation. It just helps, moving forward, makes it quicker. And I'll say this, if you're in an incident, every second counts. So that's another reason to have an incident response plan, is you don't want to be wasting time trying to figure out what you should do. If you have a good incident response plan, you're going to be able to just read it and quickly take action. And depending on the level of the incidents, you may have to get legal counsel and have legal responses. And then also, depending on if there's data stolen, what's the reporting requirements, you're going to want to have all that spelled out in your IRP. And then just documentation on what you want to cover on your wrap up when you're finishing an incident. What data do you want to collect? What information do you want to report? And the last part I would say is just, at what point do you go from crisis mode to normal operations mode? You want to spell that out.
Yeah, I have a little experience in that. I obviously won't share every detail, but we had a third party that got breached, included some of our information. Luckily, it didn't include anything on our networks. So we didn't have to, it wasn't, critical level because we didn't have anyone running around our networks, but that documentation thing is so important. We did document pretty well, but we documented it in a non-centralized way. And so what we found later on is when we tried to recount the information, as we tried to put things together to kind of finalize the report, it was very difficult to find all the information. Someone had a few notes written down here, another person had a few notes written down over there, trying to figure out where all that was. So that's something I guess it's kind of a little bit near and dear to my heart after we went through this incident.
With that said, Tanner, I guess I would ask you, how often should we review an IRP? What's some of the best practices for, how often do you review and maybe even test an IRP?
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely tell you what we do. Well, first, let me say, I think you should review it as often as you can, and that obviously not be a detriment to the other projects you're trying to get done. So for us, that's typically annually. For others, maybe it's quarterly, that have a little more time potentially, but we do it annually. One of the reasons we do that is because things change. I mean, not only do tactics change, but laws change potentially, reporting requirements change. We had a conversation kind of pre-show where we were talking about some additional regulations we were going to have to abide by, and that has to go in that incident response plan. And the reason we do this as part of our tabletop is, at least from a high level, it helps us figure out if this IRP is going to hold up under fire. Obviously, a tabletop is nowhere near the stress level or the intensity level of a cyber incident, but at least gets us as close as we can get without going through that. And the big thing for us is that tabletop, that IRP process, it gives us a feedback loop. So basically, you had the review of the IRP. So what we typically do is we review it prior to the tabletop. We go through the tabletop and we use it in the tabletop, and then we write down all of the notes that we need to do. And then we have a process after the tabletop's over. A couple things. One, we're going to improve things that we kind of identified in the tabletop, just cyber best practices. And two, we're going to figure out how do we improve our incident response plan. Do we cover everything? Was there anyone we needed to notify that wasn't in there? Has a position changed? Something like that. So for us, I think that's how we do it. We do it on an annual basis. You guys, I don't know if you do it differently, Anthony, but obviously you can do it as often as you need to.
I'll go ahead and fess up. I'm one of those people that wanted to have the perfect IRP. So we really just completed ours recently. Anyway, so that's something, I really just learned from my mistake, just get started, have something out there, and then just improve upon it afterwards. But I have another question in regards to that, Tanner. Who should all be involved in a review, and who should all be involved in a tabletop?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we've kind of adjusted our thinking over time on that. Initially, it was just the IT group.
Mm-hmm.
We thought, hey, it's a cyber incident. Mainly, it's going to be a technical response. We don't really need to get everyone involved. They're busy. They're doing something else, right? Maybe they don't want to be here. And I think all those arguments can be valid. But what we found over time, and especially as we went through this third-party cyber incident, is that there's a lot more people involved than technical folks. So in our IRP review, we include ourselves, obviously, as technical staff. We typically include any type of legal representative if you have one. If not, we just forward it to legal. But our communications, front office communications folks, anyone who's going to deal with like customers or members, potentially, we're going to have to tell people we've potentially lost data, so they need to be involved. But really, just anyone that has any public presence, our social media staff, all of those kind of people, accounting staff. I mean, there's a chance that we have to face a decision on paying a ransom, right? So um, they may have to approve that payment if we decide to go forward with it, or we may have to have that discussion. So all of those people need to be involved, and we've kind of expanded over the years. You don't want to make it too large. What we do is just try to have a good representative from each of those groups, and then all of our technical staff.
Yeah, I can see, especially if someone has a role in the IRP, like they definitely need to be aware. You don't want to spring on, have an incident and they're like, what am I supposed to do? So I definitely, I think including folks is great. But I'll say this, if you're new to it and your team wants to get more familiar, have something internally with your IT department. And then, later on, you can start growing it out like Tanner did. I think that's a good method. Just get yourself comfortable if you need to.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think you got to start somewhere. You may be starting from a point where others don't agree with you, that
Mm-hmm.
others say we don't need this, maybe even some of your other technical colleagues. So I think it may be a team of one. And if it's a team of one, at least get that on I think I remember, which, not related to incident response plans, but when we first initially created a help desk, we were still just taking calls from people for any type of IT problems. And I said, we need a help desk. And honestly, I had to do it on my own for a little while. I had to prove value. And so if that's you, if you're the person that's saying, we need an IRP, I really believe this is something important, then do it yourself if you have to. Prove the value, then kind of win your teammates over, win the organization over, and you can do that in an iterative fashion, just like Anthony said.
Okay.
Yeah, Anthony, I thought, as we're starting to wrap up here a little bit, I thought we'd just talk about like our words of advice. I think we're both of us have IRPs at this point. I think we're in different stages. We've started at different times, so I think we have some unique perspectives. So maybe in your mind, what are like some things that, as you've went through this recently, were things that would help you out if you were talking to yourself before?
Yeah, I guess one, don't let perfection get in the way. I'm one of those people. I'm just very critical of myself, and anyways, I just like if I'm gonna have an IRP, it's got to be a great IRP. So that I let that delay us, and which was a mistake. I realize that that's a mistake at this point. And two, there's lots of resources out there, and there's lots of people out there that are willing to help. That was one thing. I reached out. I reached out. We have an IT listserv for the electric cooperatives, and I had a gamut. I had a ton of people respond, and they gave me scrub versions, and gave me input and stuff like that. And I'm very appreciative of that. That helped speed up the process tremendously. But there's a lot of resources out there: CISA, CIS, NIST. There's SANS. There's just so many resources out there, and there's also people willing to help. So one, again, I'll just repeat: don't let perfection stop you, from getting somewhere. And two, don't be afraid to ask for help.
Yeah, I was trying to think of the same things, like what really helped us along the way, and we've been doing it, I think, maybe a few years longer, but that doesn't really mean anything is better. Things have changed so much. One Some of the things I wrote down, including as many stakeholders as you can when you're creating your IRP. Obviously, if you're that team of one, like I mentioned, do it by yourself. Don't let that stand in the way. But if you do have buy-in, try to get a lot of people involved, because your communication staff, they're really good at what they do. I mean, they know how to talk to the public, and that's going to be part of your IRP. So, like, don't leave them out, and then kind of bring them in later. Get buy-in from the top down if you can. I think that is honestly, I think you could probably apply that across the board to any type of technology or cybersecurity project. But the buy-in, if you get buy-in from the top, then you're going to have a lot easier road as you go through the process. And as I mentioned earlier, making sure that it's simple enough for your most recent technical employee to follow. So imagine, so all of y'all are, everyone's at a conference, on the West Coast, and there's just the guy there that's the most recent hire. Could he at least get things going? Obviously, you guys are going to fly back as soon as you can, the rest of the team, but if it's simple enough for him to get things going, I think you're in a good place. And one thing kind of we learned from our experience with this third party breach is make sure you follow your IRP. I know that sounds crazy, but obviously we weren't in a situation where people were running rampant around our network. Um, that was a situation where we just had some data that we were looking through. But uh, there's a tendency to just kind of fly by the seat of your pants. And I know it sounds like, well, hey, you've got a plan. You just pull out your plan and start using it. Situations kind of tend to evolve. You're in your IRP or you're going to use your IRP like on step 3, if that makes sense. Because something happens, then there's a little more information that trickles in, then a little more information, then you're like, oh, okay, this is an incident we need to use our IRP for. And there's a tendency to kind of just make snap decisions and not look at your IRP. So those are some things that I would say is like, when you actually get into the fire, whether it's third party or hopefully not, but if it's your personal networks that you're having to use this IRP against, don't forget you have it and use it. There's just a tendency to just go off the rails, I guess, when you're under stress.
One thing I just want to add on before we leave that I thought was cool. There is a USB device that has a keypad for encryption. It's actually FIPS compliant, and it is the Aegis Secure Key 3NX. They have several different models, but that's one thing. If you have an incident response plan, and like cyber insurance, you're not going to want to put those, on a computer. If you're hacked, people will be able to pull your incident response plan. They'll be able to pull your security policy, and that could hurt you if you're trying to negotiate, what the ransom is. But anyways, I saw these USB devices out there that, you can encrypt. I thought that was a great idea to store that and keep it off your network.
Yeah, I agree with that. I would say that's something that we've done is kind of create, like a little bit of a go bag. Maybe we need to actually purchase that device. It sounds like something we could add or maybe enhance it, but just having copies of your incident response plan, copies of your any type of cyber policies you have, copies of your documentation, any type of tools you might use as you're responding, things like the ability to image a drive, the ability to pull and scrape RAM, things like that. Basically anything that you would need to either preserve evidence or keep a copy of a machine, and maybe a computer that hasn't been touched your network. We kind of try to think of, in an incident, there's potential for us to not have access to our own computer. So something like that. It's kind of related to incident response plans because we have ours in there, but I think it's just another tool, or it's maybe the next step after you get your incident response plan is to have all of that stuff kind of in one central place that you can kind of like, it's portable, you can take it with you, and you can, hopefully never have to use it, but if you need to, have it all right there.
So yeah, you heard it first on Off the Wire. Tanner is a IT prepper. Got a bug out
Yeah.
bag. That's actually a pretty good idea.
Yeah, we actually, so this is a while back. We had a SecureWorks led course where they actually taught us incident response. And obviously, I know this has been a few years ago, but many of the methodologies have changed. But that was one of the things they suggested. So can't take credit on that as my idea or anything. But I think it's worked out well for us. Hopefully, we never have to use it.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense. Usually, like, if you have a dispatch, a lot of times they'll have binders with everything printed out just to have it on hand. So, I mean, I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, paper copies can't be breached.
Yeah. I do.
You would think so. They might be lost, but they can't be breached.
Yeah, I definitely think it's worth having on paper. But the thing I like with the USB drive, if you plug it into a computer, you can do a Control F and find where you're trying to go real quick.
That is true. Better than flipping through pages for sure.
I would recommend both, honestly.
Yeah. So Anthony, one of the things I saw is the CIS actually offers an IRP template. So I know we've talked about this, and we can put the link in the show notes. CIS, we talked about that I think 3 episodes ago, maybe 4. All that they offer, they also offer an IRP template, and the template does not require to be a member, so you can get the template even without. In your industry, you mentioned it earlier, I think most industries, there are people that may be a little farther along than you are. And in most industries, I think people are willing to share. And so ask any colleagues you have if they would give you a kind of a framework of what they use. And I think that can help you as well, especially because some industries are a little more specific on requirements and reporting and things like that. So That also maybe. Is there anything else that I'm missing here? Any other resources that you might think of?
Well, what we can do is we'll put in the show notes. We'll list some other references, but yeah, there's plenty out there. Like I think I mentioned again, SANS and NIST. They all have. NIST was one of the first places I went to look at incident response plans, and CISA. They've definitely got some documentation out there. I'm sure there's a million more, templates out there, but there's lots of help available.
All right, so that's all we have for the IRP episode. We really hope it helped all of you, no matter where you're at, in creating your IRP plan. If you haven't subscribed to our podcast, please subscribe. We're going to bring a lot more cybersecurity and technology episodes. If you have any ideas, feel free to reach out to us. You can email us at show@offthewirepodcast.com. Or if you just visit our website, offthewirepodcast.com, there's a contact us page. You can find us anywhere podcasts are found. And you can follow us on our social media channels. Right now we have YouTube, X, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Be sure to join the conversation with any of our posts there. Just feel free to jump in. And if you have a colleague who you think this could help, or really just anyone that's interested in the subject, feel free to share the podcast. We really would appreciate it. Remember that we drop episodes every other Monday. So we hope you enjoyed this episode. Many more to come. Join us next time. This is Off the Wire Podcast.